and welcome to Galley Stories, stories of the Bering Sea and beyond, hosted by Mark Kaler. My name is Penka Jane, podcast deckhand and longtime listener. We'd thank you to subscribe to the podcast and leave us a review. Here's today's catch.
Hello guys, and welcome back to another installment of Galley Stories, stories of the Bering Sea and beyond. I am your host, Mark Kaler. And today we're sitting on the Northwestern with the infamous captain, Captain Sig Hansen. How are you today, Sig?
I'm good, thanks.
Appreciate you taking the time.
Yeah, it's been a while. You've asked me for quite some time to do this, and one thing or another, I finally got around to it. So yeah, this will be fun.
All right, well, let's dive into it. Where were you born, Sig, and what was your earliest memories of being around the water?
Well, I was born in Seattle, Washington. My parents, both of them, are from a little town called Åkrehamn, which is Karmøy, and that's on the southwest corner of Norway. And so we got a real large Norwegian connection, with community from there. And, as we speak, we're sitting here in Ballard, Seattle, Washington. The boat is in shipyard, and we are in my galley, which, strangely enough, you've got your galley stories. But, starting from the beginning, as far as the Norwegian connection, that's where everything started with me. Dad, when he was a young man, he came over here in 58 to Seattle looking for work. A lot of the immigrants from Norway, especially this one little town, or community rather, a lot of the guys ended up right here in Seattle, Washington, in Ballard, where we're at right now. And this community is, fishing based. And back then it was much more so than it is today. And guys were just looking for work. The herring industry had collapsed in Norway. And if you're a young man, you either went to the East Coast out to New Bedford, or you ended up kind of here. And back then, a lot of these guys, as far as a green card or and all that, you just needed someone to sign for you, to vouch for you. So, strangely enough, a lot of the guys that from Dad's community, where Mom and Dad are born and raised, came from there, and they just kind of ended up here, one after the other, And Dad was looking for work, just halibut fishing is what he was looking for. There was no real king crab industry or any king crab boom. And so when he got over here, he, him and his friend Tom, who ran the Northwestern for many years, it's tremendous fisherman. Anyway, Tom Christensen. So the story goes, they were run out of money, couldn't find any work, because there was always work, but a lot of the guys from the northern part of Norway were in control of the halibut industry back then in the 50s. And so, they're here in Ballard, and there's a place called Ballard Avenue where all the pubs and the bars are. And when Dad vouched for my Uncle Carl to come over here, he was a young man. They're like, well, you don't go to Ballard Avenue because that's where all the drinking and all that stuff goes on. And first thing he does, get off the plane, and of course he's going to tell the taxi, I'm going to Ballard Avenue. And not just because there was all the young guys and all the fun and all that, but because that's where you found work, in a lot of these bars. Smoke Shop being one of the places, which was historical in my mind for that generation. So story goes, the old man, my father, Sverre Hansen, and Tom Christensen, they were beating the docks, 20-something years old. And he had borrowed money from my grandfather to make the trip over here, and they were running out of dough, and so they're running out of dough, and then they're thinking, well, Jesus, if we can't find work, what do? We got to find our way back, or maybe go to the East Coast, do something. And so Tom, who's very conservative, very gentle man, he's like, well, we got to eat too, what should we do? We got to have food. And so he's like, should I go buy some bread? And so we got some food. And then Dad said, well, why don't you just go down to the corner and get a bottle of Thunderbird wine? And we'll start there. And so Tom's like, okay, and goes and gets this Thunderbird wine, which is garbage, right? Evidently, that's the pretty cheap stuff that you could get, cheapest at the time. So he goes and buys the wine, and of course they have a few nips, and in my opinion, if I knew my dad right, he probably was getting a little more flamboyant. I think that kind of runs in the family after a little bit of lubricant. And so they ended up at one of the bars down here on Ballard Avenue. Next thing you know, they probably weren't afraid to ask for work. They probably were a little more aggressive. They probably had more courage. And before you knew it, they got a job on one of the boats out here halibut fishing. That's all it took. And it's funny, Dad always said, well, if it wasn't for that Thunderbird wine, I would have never made it in the fishing industry. In other words, that altered the course of his life. So he always joked about that. And then, anyway, you know what? Saying that, I'm going to fast forward into another story that is similar to that before I move on. But I just got to say this now. So, here we are many years later after our family's been established and in the fishing industry. Next thing you know, these guys from Original Productions come around. The guy's name is Tom Beers. He owned the production company. He was pitching his show to a little network called Discovery Channel. So he had heard about this crab fishing in Alaska, and he'd heard about all these crazy stories, and he thought, it can't be true. And then he ends up going on one of the boats, the Fierce Allegiance, which is a well-known boat, and Message still owns the boat, I think, and Tony LaRussa, I think, was the captain, and, good guys. Anyway, and very aggressive, big name. And so he had done a trip with them and taken some footage, and then, of course, he had to find cast members, if you want to call it that, or people to participate in his new idea. And so he's in Seattle, and he's beating the docks. That means that you're walking the docks, when you're beating the dock, it means you're looking for work. So basically, Tom was beating the docks, but he was looking for work for him, for his show, his potential show, his idea. And then, he's, talking to all these different captains and owners and a lot of family-owned boats, and he's interviewing these guys. Next thing you know, we're the last guy on the list, and it was just through word of mouth, and we happened to be in town. So anyway, he was going to go back to Los Angeles, and they had time for one more interview. We were the last ones, and there was a lot of guys that were on the show that aren't there now. There's some guys that could have been on the show but chose not to do it. So when he met the Hansen brothers, which is myself, Norman, and Edgar, Dad had already passed away at this time, and we were gearing up to go fishing. And so I heard they wanted an interview, and I thought it was just going to be an interview, like, who are you? Tell me about yourself. I had no idea what their concept was. So they end up interviewing us down here in Ballard, and of course, they were like 3 hours late, and so we were in one of the pubs in Ballard, very similar to my father. And I got to be honest when I tell you, we're talking 17 years ago on the first pilot. So I was a different person back then. So were my brothers. And I'm not lying when I say if someone would ask me, hey, can I get a picture? I'd be shy. If someone said, give me an interview, I wouldn't do it. We grew up very, very conservative, very with respect for people, and just camera shy, which is strange because Norman, he's the best photographer around and he knows everything about video, but trying to get him on TV is like pulling teeth. The old saying in our family is, Norman got the brains, Edgar got the looks, and I got the mouth. So, from my father. So anyway, we agreed to the interview or meet these guys. Didn't have a clue what they're about. We get, after 3 hours, well, what do you think we're going to do at that time? And we're in this area. We're going to have a couple of beers, or whatever you want to call it.
Sodas.
Sodas. And actually, I had my, I drink vodka Coke, or have drank vodka Coke, which is Norwegian champagne. That's another story. But next thing you know, 3 hours go by, whatever. And similar to my father and Tom, we were feeling pretty energetic, a little more confident, and not as fearful. And we had no idea that we were going to be on tape. So they take us down to the water. We're down there, and they put this big camera on us and sat us next to each other and wanted to hear our life story and the whole hoo-ha. Well, because of the fact that we didn't show any fear in front of the camera or the interview, and because we were being ourselves, because we forgot about all of our own paranoias and our own insecurities, we start picking on each other, and I'm jabbing my brothers, and they're jabbing me, and we're going at it like brothers do. And then all this footage goes to Los Angeles. Next thing you know, they're like, "We want you guys." And I'm thinking to myself, in a very sober state, why would they want us? And then it dawned on me, had it not been for Ballard, had it not been for that Thunderbird wine, I would have never been on a program which has lasted now 17 years and still going strong in over 100 countries. The same as my father, had it not been for that, probably wouldn't have been here in Seattle and been established as one of the pioneers in the Alaska crab fishery. And I love it because, I've always wanted fishing to be a legacy and in my life, which I'll talk about, but I always wanted something else as well to show what I have done for my own personal legacy on the side, so to speak. So it's just kind of a funny story to me because it's amazing what a bottle of Thunderbird wine can do.
Indeed it is. Indeed it is. What about, let's get back to some of your earliest childhood memories of coming down to the boat with your dad.
Well, that's just the thing, when Dad succeeded to get work here off the coast of Washington, there was a lot of cod fishing and halibut, things like that, salmon, of course, and so it all boils down to what his accomplishments were, because he's always been my hero, naturally so, right? Especially with a family business like we have. So anyway, he ended up doing that, and of course. Time goes on, spent a couple of years in the military for the U.S., and he had a job with a guy named Dan Lakita, who in his mind was legendary. Of course, he was legendary, and that's when they started crab fishing in Alaska. And I think he started in 59 or something like that, 60, something like that. Anyway, he had been working on a boat called the Foremost, and I'd always heard about that boat, growing up. And then, of course, things went very quickly for my father. Got into a steel boat with another partner. That was a California-built boat. That was the steel Foremost. The other one was wood. And I remember that boat really well. And so that's where my first memories are, because, the boats were always down here in Ballard for repair. And that's where, you'd go with your father whenever you could on weekends or during the summer, all the time, to come down and, of course, paint and chip rust and do whatever you had to do, or what you were told to do, rather. And I think he probably did that for me just to create a path or a mindset. I think that was his goal, trying to teach you that, it doesn't just come handed. You got to put some work into it. And I think he was just showing us the ropes, And I know a lot of these other families, it was the same way. The Bundren family, which is, Chuck Bundren, he owns Trident Seafood, same thing. He was always like that with his children. It's one of those work ethic things that, I think you got to teach. And I think Dad was very good at that. And, of course, being in the military for a while, his methods might be a little more harsh than others, or other people's methods. First memory was down here in Ballard, and then the Foremost, that was always a big one. And There was 14 of those boats built, and they were meant for California waters. They weren't. They were good crab boats. It was very speedy. It did about, Jesus, I think that boat, he was telling me, did like 14 knots. Real fast. It had a bulbous bow. And so I remember always coming down here on that. I never got to fish on that boat, which is probably a good thing because the son of a gun sank. And out of all 14 of those boats, every one of them went down. And you got to remember at that time, back in those days when the king crab fishery, there wasn't Baird Eye, there was no Opelio seasons. There was no market that was established. So it was all about the king crab season. And, when those guys, the pioneers started fishing for red king crab, it was 8-9 cents a pound. Now we're seeing 10, 11, 12 bucks a pound. And back then they would fish off of Dutch Harbor. They would go out for daylight, come back in every night and offload. Pretty much that's how it went because they didn't have the sodium lights like they have nowadays. These big bright lights we can go around the clock. And the sodium lights changed everything because now you could go farther, you could stay out, and that type of thing. And the boats got bigger naturally, and so your capacity was more, and so you could venture farther. So when they say Dutch Harbor fishery and what those guys were doing, they were fishing around the islands. That's all they did, and they would fish, all around the coast, Kodiak, all the way down the chain, and then way out west, But they would just fish the islands near shore. They didn't venture out into the Bering Sea till later.
And come back in every night and offload?
Like when my mom was up there, when she came to the country, she'd go up and then stay, Carl Moses, who's a legendary figure in Dutch Harbor, she'd stay at Carl's place. And, you could always hear stories about how cold it was. And, you could see through the walls, it was not Club Med here. But, and she'd go out with them once in a while too. But there was no place for a lady either. And she would admit that, at least back then. So, they'd come back in every night, offload. And of course, they had their little giddy-ups, you went in Akutan and, you'd hire some of the kids to offload your boat for you. Well, maybe you went and had a little, toddy or two.
Thunderbird?
Yeah, a little Thunderbird. And so, a lot of that was going on. And they didn't realize at the time what the industry was going to do, if it was going to be there forever. None of that. But they were just young men having a good time. And that mentality is probably still there today, depending on how mature you want to be. Mm-hmm. So, and rules have changed, you got to be nice. So I'm always envious of the fact that they got away with a lot of stuff that you probably wouldn't get away with today. So Dad was always a hero of mine, and of course, when he got the foremost, that was a very proud moment. And then I think I was like 10 or 11, something like that. Then they were going across the Gulf. They were going to go fish the new season. And, of course, this is when the lights were on and, it was different, longer seasons. And when she sank out in the middle there, I know the old man was home. A guy named Odvar Medhug, he was taking the boat up. And he was another one of my, absolute heroes. He was a screaming demon. Got the job done, and he was just a go-getter. And remember, he's also from the same town that Dad was, and Tom, and all these guys. So this connection, and I think, and Dad did vouch for him to come. And he was a young guy compared to him, and you want guys that are hungry, and he was hungry. So he was always been a hero of mine. Anyway, I remember it was right before we were going to go to school, early in the morning. And, got the news. I'm thinking the Coast Guard. I'm not sure where the old man got the news from. And then I remember him talking to my mother about it. And I couldn't believe it, because the boat was everything, right? And in our social order, in our social system, in our culture, especially being, Norwegian like that, it has a lot to do with it because they're speaking. Yeah, he was talking to somebody in Norwegian. That's right. Getting the story straight. And when the boat capsized, You know, everybody managed to survive, which is just amazing. And they did get picked up by another guy that was in the area. I forget who now. But you got to understand, growing up, at least in my mind, all I thought about, all our families talked about was fishing. From my grandmother and father to my mother, father, and everybody we knew. And you got to imagine, you know, like when the old man, my father was gone for months on end, you know, my mother, you know, my first language was Norwegian, right? My first day of school, I get a note from the teacher, give this to your mom, you know, and the note said, you need to start speaking English in the house. Well, when she came over to the country, she couldn't speak English, and all of the other women that were together with these fishermen from the same area of Norway, you know, they had their own little groups, right? And so when they went out, they were speaking Norwegian. They were together all the time. And so English was never a big priority for them because they had their system, their social system and their group and their friends and other families. And all the other families were fishermen with fishermen's wives and children. And, you know, you went to church and, you know, right down here in Ballard, and I was born right here in Ballard, where the boat is at now. So, you know, you went to Sunday school, for crying out loud, and half the kids were Norwegian descent. It was just because of this area, because this is the area where a lot of the Scandinavian influence came from. Then of course you're going to settle here, and then you're going to, whether it's church or school, you're going to have that influence with you. And so even the kids that I grew up with that were, you know, my age or even younger, we'd speak Norwegian to each other, or we knew Norwegian because our parents would speak it to us, or we may respond in English, but they were all from fishing families. Every last one of them in our family, my cousins and everybody. So when I think back, it's real interesting. And then, of course, what's the topic of the day, right? Fishing. You go to somebody's house, one of your friends, and you're, you know, 8, 9, 10 years old, and there's pictures of boats hanging on the wall, right? It's like, that's Dad's boat. That's, you know, this one and this one. You know, you see these big king crab, mounted king crab hanging on the wall. Every house you went to. I got one hanging in my house, for crying out loud. So, you know, that was just the social order of things. And so, obviously, when you talk about fishing, I mean, honestly, before, most kids would go, I remember the first day of school, and it was awkward. And you know, most kids would draw, you know, mom and dad, or they draw a picture of a house or something like that. I'm drawing pictures of freaking boats. You know? I mean, it's just, you know, when I think back, and I remember even one of my high school reunions, a gal came up and said, hey, look at this picture. I said, what picture? She had it in her wall. She goes, you drew this for me when you were, you know, first, second, third grade, something like that. It was a picture of a boat. And somehow she kept it, and she's going through her memoirs, and she found it, you know. So I just think, you know, that just shows you the type of lifestyle we had. And I suppose if we were farmers, we'd be talking about potatoes or carrots, but that's just not how it is. And that's everything that in my life, even as a young boy, evolved around fishing. So when that boat went down, the foremost, I mean, I remember I had to go to school. You know, they forced me, didn't want to go. And when I walked into that, I remember when I walked in there, and I just had a breakdown. I mean, I lost it. I just stood there, bawled like a little baby, didn't want to be in school, and just thought life was over. Boat's gone. So now what are you going to do? You got nothing. Already knew that. You're like 10 years old. Oh, Jesus, what are we going to do now? Which is not the way a kid should be thinking, but that's how I thought. And I remember them, you know, I remember some lady, she's like, what the hell is wrong with you? And then they sent me home or something like that, or they took me home. and took the day off. But that was, not traumatic. I don't know. I'm not gonna. It was just one of those things that you remember.
How big was the foremost?
I think she was 96 or 98 foot, which is pretty good for back then, and real speedy. They had the windows. Nowadays you have it's actually a Norwegian design where you have if it's a house forward boat, the windows are facing forward, right? And that one was built with the windows slanted back. And so when you have those windows, I forget the terminology, but when the windows are tilted back like that, they break out real easy, because when a wave comes up and over, it lands flat on those windows. Where when you got a windows facing forward, house forward boat with windows tilted forward like that, the wave comes over, crashes, but then it actually kind of helps force that inertia down. Yeah, and it kind of forces it down and keeps your windows intact. So anyway, there were, you got to remember that these pioneers, especially of my dad's generation, they were anything that could float and could carry a pot, they were doing it, right? I don't care if it's a wooden scow or, a tuna seiner or, a salmon, seine boat. They were using it and kind of refabricating these boats to fit their needs. So they were never built specifically for that industry or what they did.
Bringing bender boats up from down in Louisiana and scallop boats and
sure, and anything that could float they would use.
The Viking Queen came from the East Coast.
There you go.
Yeah.
And well, that's Corey's old boat too, by the way. Yeah. And so, and that's fine. It's just, it's all about stability, which we take so seriously today because, of all the loss of life we've had and all that. But, then stability, I mean, it was there. It wasn't a requirement. And so stability was a big part of our growth as a fleet and an industry. And, there was guys that, you'd load your gear on. You're trying to get as many pots on as you could. And then you'd just look at the water line. All right, she looks okay. And let's go. That's not stability here. That's just looking at the water line. There's boats that have left the harbor here and didn't make it out past the freaking buoy and they tipped over. So anyway, that was kind of the way it was, and I thought life was over. And then a year later, right at that time is when things started ramping up for the crab industry. So in the mid '70s, things were starting to look up. The market was getting much stronger, and for the price. The quotas, they were going up and up and up. And so guys were taking advantage of it. And right around that time, I mean, you could buy a boat here in Seattle and Ballard and, you get on a list. And they were pumping them out 2, 3, 4 a month. I mean, they're just pumping these boats out, building them as fast as they could. Because the orders were coming in so fast because these guys were making money hand over fist because the market and everything, the stars lined up and the market was there. And, you could have a contract on a boat and then it was slated to be built, 4 months later or something like that. And then you go down to the Ballard Avenue and you might be having a Thunderbird with one of these guys that had a contract, and people would literally sell their contracts. Like, yeah, I got a boat being built in March. And he's like, well, Jesus, I got to wait till next June. And he might sell his contract for $200,000 more at that time. And those boats were being built for, around $1 million, 900 million, 78, 9. You're looking at $1 million, 2, 3, 4, something like that, depending on the model and all that stuff. So, I mean, if you can sell a contract for $200,000, and you do the math what that was back in 76, 7, 8, 9 versus today, a lot of dough. Yeah. Just for waiting for a couple of months. But guys didn't want to wait either because fishing was so hot, they wanted to get in on those seasons. And so, time is money. So anyway, that's about the time when Northwestern was built. Of course, I was still a kid. and real proud, down here all the time, watching her being built, the whole 9 yards. And it was a lot of fun. The christening was a lot of fun. And back then, I don't care. Our thing in our family was, of course, we went to, had to go to Sunday school, and then you went house shopping. I mean, you go to these open houses. That was just, oh my God, because you're sitting in the back of an LTD, and folks are smoking, the windows are rolled up, and you're dying of, smoke inhalation. And then you got to suffer through, first you got to suffer through Sunday school, church, and then you got to suffer through an open house, and then typically there you'd end up going to a christening. So there was always a christening, for a boat. When it was built brand new, they had the flags on and everything. They smashed the champagne bottle and said the speech, and that was always fun too. So there was, that was kind of just the way it was.
So let's hear about the christening day of the Northwestern.
Well, that was at Marco Shipyard, which is right across the way here on the other side of the water, and I remember that. I remember it real well. And I remember my old man. I remember driving down, and I remember him nervous as just all get out. He was nervous, and I don't know what to say. What do I do? 'Cause he's a very, very humble man. But then, like I said, he can be very outspoken as well, depending on your needs. And I remember him saying, first thing he said was, well, I'm not one for making speeches, but, and I remember those words because I remember him so nervous driving down to make the speech. You got your suit on. Of course, everybody wore suits. All dressed up. It was very respectable. Who was the pastor now? Oh, come on. He's a fisherman, and for crying out loud. Oh my gosh. Anyway, another Norwegian that was he was a fisherman and / pastor, and so it'll come to me. But anyway, he was making the speech. I see his face. He was making the speech, and then Dad did his thing, and I just remember how proud he was. So that was really something. And then of course when the guys took off, you couldn't get out of town fast enough. So it was time to go. So that was always fun. And by that time, right around then is when I started my own thing. And in the summers, we'd always try to go to Norway, or at least, our grandparents on each side would either come to Seattle to visit, whether it was summer or winter, and then, or we'd go to Norway, of course. And so there was always that Norwegian connection with that town in Norway. And we would go, stay a month. And I know that for me, it was very, very important. It was, you had a feeling like you knew who you are, where you're from, what you're all about. Your family, not just history, but your roots, so to speak. And so that gave you, for me, it gave me a feeling of belonging. But then it also it makes you wonder who you were, because half of you is Norwegian and you're speaking the language, for crying out loud, and the other half you're an American citizen, right? And different cultures would clash. So you're growing up in a whole different culture, so you kind of behave differently than a lot of the other kids that you hung out with in school. Totally different upbringing. Which I don't regret, like a lot of the kids that I grew up with, they didn't have the 6 o'clock family dinner every day. Even if Dad wasn't there, it was dinner on the table. If you're not there, your ass is grass. That type of thing. Very traditional upbringing. So we're very fortunate to have that. And we do it to this day with our daughters. And my wife has the same mentality. So anyway, by the time I was 12, I think it was, then I was, we were in Norway, and I started poking around for a job, and we'd, for fun, even before then, we'd pick like strawberries You get paid under the table for picking strawberries for the farmers around there, potatoes, stuff like that. Little odd jobs here and there, and had such a good time over there because we were always fishing. I mean, we would build, our own crab pots because in that town, you're right next to the harbor where the herring industry was. And then my grandmother's place was right there on the water. And so we were living on the water. I mean, you'd get off the plane and we're in a boat. As early as I can remember. So we're always fishing. And then I think I was 12 and I got a job fishing for mackerel and jigging cod. And that was through my father's cousin and a buddy of mine. His name's Glenn Tony. He was over there, and we were just asking around. And I think he must have said to the old man that, hey, these kids are asking for work. Is that okay? Obviously, yes. We go out. It's like maybe a 25, 30-foot wooden boat. And so you'd fish with net. You'd fish with hook and line, jig. And then and you'd go out, and we'd stay out. We'd go out early. Depending on where he was fishing, you'd come back in at night, or we'd stay for a couple of nights and go island hopping because they had different canneries, facilities from one island to the next. And so we'd overnight, and he'd pay us cash, and you'd be 13 years old, and you're doing that, 12, and then you would pocket the money because it was cash, and then you'd come in and have a good time. And then,
good time at 12 and 13.
Well, yeah, I mean, you were making money. Now, by the time, so then let me see. So then, at the age of 14, then I got a job with a guy named John Johannesson for Bristol Bay salmon fishing, and so I know I was always late for school because we'd come back from Norway late sometimes, or we'd go to Norway early. So I was always skipping out of school. Lucky me. Or trying to, depending on how we did. So if we went to Norway, I got that for a little bit of work, for a little bit, just to learn. And then when I was 14, then I went salmon fishing with John Jacobson, and that was a lot of fun because then I think I left early. I think I got to leave school early then. Did that. And I remember another one of Dad's friends, another guy that was here in Seattle as well, that moved his family over. His name was Tunis Peterson, who's the father to the guy that I was fishing with in Norway, because we were the same age. And he was one of Dad's best friends. Next thing you know, he tells me, he goes, "You're going to go work for John." He goes, "The only advice I'm going to give you is beat the other guy. Just beat the other guy. That's all you got to remember." And I didn't understand what he meant. He got up there. Of course, we're picking fish, and John didn't like to use a reel like for red salmon like they do today. Now some of these guys they're just amazing at what they do. They can pick 2, 3, 400,000 pounds of fish. They use a reel. We were a 2-man crew. Now they got, Jesus, 3, 4 guys on some of these 32-foot gill netters in Bristol Bay in Alaska. It's just unreal what they're doing. And so we have the reel on for king fishing, and then take it off for reds, and then you're stacking the net on deck, and then you're picking through it.
You're hand pulling the net in.
Yeah, so you hand pull the net in. You had a hydraulic reel, but then you still got to pull it in by hand and stack it. And then, you're a kid. And then I understood what he meant. Beat the other guy. Because it was just him and another. Tim Mars was there the first time with me as a young guy. And then Sven was there for many years. And so I got it. Because, the faster you pick, the more fish you get out of the net faster. The faster you can get the net in the water and make money. And then you want to beat the other guy. That was just incentive. But as a kid, when you program a little boy's mind, beat the other guy, you're going to fucking do it. So I know by the time I was 16, and, no offense, Sven, he just passed away. But, I was beating him. And he was, in his prime. He was, and big and strong. But he had those big, sausage fingers. Well, you ain't going to beat a little kid that's full of piss and vinegar and little fingers that can really pick fast. And I had a trick. You're not supposed to cut the web And so John would always, like, we had these picking hooks. They had a little knife on the end, and he'd bend them over so you couldn't cheat. But if I really got buggered up, I would just put the hook in there, and I didn't let him spin it. So when I spun the hook, it would put so much tension on the web, it would bust it out of the gills, and I would get that. Plus, anything that was loose in front of me, I'm getting it into my side of the brailers right away. He's not paying attention. He wants to pick the fish out of the net, which you're supposed to do, which we did. But every time you can get one more in your side of the basket, and it's laying loose, that's going in the basket. And I'm quick as hell because I'm a little guy, young. And I'll never forget when John was, we were offloading one time, and John, he's just smoking a cigarette and hat on, and he's speaking Norwegian because Sven was Norwegian too. He's just, ha 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 ha. The kid got you, didn't he? Like, he got you, And then you felt like, wow, this is what it's all about. Let's go kick some ass, man.
Compliments from a Norwegian family in history. From what I've understood, talking to Tor Tollefsen and stuff, you couldn't even fish for them. So getting one was a really big deal.
Oh, that's really true. Yeah, they didn't blow a bunch of smoke up here. You know what? And that's just the way it is. They grew up the same way, and they're going to treat you the same as they were treated, and that's just how it is. And that's okay, as long as if you can get that one compliment, you've done your job. You know what I mean?
Yeah.
You've succeeded. You're never going to get an "I love you" from Daddy every day when he pats your head and sends you off to school. Not going to happen. But if you get it one time, you're going to always remember that. At least the way I was raised. And so, and I did get one finally. It took a while, but I finally got it. So anyway, that kind of really got me going. And then we went back to Norway, and then, of course, I packed my stuff, your suitcases and all that to go and with your family. And, of course, I packed my rain gear as well. And we went back out and I was fishing with Hans again, And so I was double dipping that summer. And then and I was always coming back home late to school. And there's a fellow by the name of Corey Ness, who is also one of the owners of Trident, who's historical. Legend. He's from the same island off the coast of Norway that my father's from, and many of these other gentlemen here in Ballard. Legendary figure. Legendary. And he's done so well for his time and for his family and for the industry as a whole. Just you can't say enough about the man. So I remember, when we got back and had to go back to school, of course. And by this time you're 14 years old. That was the last thing I wanted to do. No, I take it back. By the time I would say 15, 16. That's when I really started resenting it. But came back, and Corey had stopped by our home because at the time a lot of the guys moved to the north end of Seattle from Ballard because they wanted the suburbs to raise their families. And so a lot of these guys that were then influence here in Ballard moved north, 20 minutes away, which is where I live now. And that's only because of the suburbs and school systems and all that stuff. So I won't forget this either, because Corey was at the house. We had been home, and then he had made a joke or a chuckle to my old man and my mother. Said, "Ho ho ho!" And there's the little one that has to pack a sea bag to go to Norway. He thought that was the funniest thing. If you're gonna go on vacation to the old country to go visit grandma, grandpa, and grandma, you're packing your stuff. You're not packing your rain gear and your boots. And he thought that was the funniest thing. He's like, there's the kid. He's the one that's packing his shit to go to work.
Yeah.
He loved it. So I just, those little moments in time you don't forget, but I didn't realize what he meant at the time until later in life.
Yeah.
Then I thought, you know what? And when I thought about him and, then I thought, now I understand what he meant by that. So that was kind of cool. So then I remember that one summer we were fishing and I was with Glenn again. and we'd been with him for a couple of years, whatever it was. And so same thing, you're getting cash under the table. You're getting your money. And so we were going from town to town. And then I know I was 14 for sure. Then we would go out at night. And they had sometimes, if it was on a weekend, maybe you'd go to different areas. So there was different schools and different people. And when you're done fishing, you came in. If you got lucky, you're early enough because you left so early in the morning that you could meet different kids in town. And so, there was, I remember one girl we were chasing after, and later on, all of a sudden, I mentioned her name. I won't do it now. And then all of a sudden, the Norwegian newspapers blew up, and they went after this gal because they'd heard, oh, that was a crush of yours, of Sig's back in the day. And then I remember we got in, and so now we were going to be like the big boys, and we were snooping around town. We were gonna find some vodka, and we were gonna be just like the big kids. And so Glenn knew a guy that was gonna get some of this stuff for us, and but it wasn't vodka. It was what do you call it? Homemade brew. It was your what do you call it? Moonshine. And in Norwegian, they call it Himabrent, which is homemade. And so we got a hold of that stuff. Of course, it's in a vodka bottle, but it's garbage inside the bottle. And we thought we were, going to be like men. And so, of course, you didn't have any, to mix it with. There was either water, or like they had 7-Up. And of course, there was Coca-Cola. And then the other sodas they had, at least back then, it was just like something they called champagne Bruce, which is like a soda. Really wasn't much else. And of course, our other heroes in life at the time, who were maybe, I don't know, 6, 7, 8 years older, which, when you're 14, that's a lot. And they were, Glenn's brother was drinking vodka Coke. He started that, or one of them, and Leif, he was drinking that all the time. Leif, I shouldn't even say their names, but they're not going to deny it. So his buddy Leif Mannes, he was drinking that, and those guys were like, in their 20s, I guess, at the time, and older, so we thought they were the cool guys. And so we drank this vodka and Coke, and we were out about town, and it was not a pretty scene. And I remember a few years later, the guy that gave us that Himabrent had been putting rat poison in his moonshine, because if you wake up with a hangover or your head hurts, you think, wow, that was good stuff. At least that's what you thought as a kid, right? Mm-hmm. Oh, my head. We're lucky to be alive, and yes, our head hurt like hell. And so little did I know, we found out later, he's spiking this stuff with rat poison. So we were drinking, and vodka Coke, here in Seattle, they called it Norwegian champagne. That was the nickname. And even Duffy used to serve it up here at a bar we used to go to. So that was my vodka Coke story. I started off with rat poison and Coke. And my head did hurt, so I thought it did a job, but little did I know it was killing us. So anyway, and before that, I also forgot. Yeah, at the age of 12, we were talking about the Northwestern. So yeah, I didn't get to go on the maiden voyage. A year later, I got to go, because back then king crab was much earlier on. I think they were fishing in even September, even before. Well, they were fishing September for Red King, but I remember I got to go fish St. Matthew's season at the age of 12. That's what I was doing as well. And so at the age of 12, St. Matthew's, I think, was an August season. So I think I got to get out of school a little early for that one too. And then we went across the Gulf.
Now, your dad was running the boat?
Yeah, he was running the boat then.
What was your job at 12 on the Northwest?
I just wanted to be there. I didn't care. There's no job, just what are you going to do? And, I think he took me along just because it's your son, but it's like, okay, you can experience this thing and see what it's like, and we'll see how it goes. So I don't think he took me seriously then. I know when I started salmon fishing, then it was under, a different guy's wing. Then he was nervous for me. I remember that. He wasn't so nervous for me in Norway, but he was nervous for me when I went to Bristol Bay. For salmon up in Bristol Bay. And so it was 12, and they had there's a makeshift bunk on the port side here. And we had real bad storm going across. I remember that because the anchor was loose, just pounding and pounding. So you'd hear this anchor just beating every wave. And they couldn't get it tightened up for some reason. Really seasick. I mean, very seasick. Sick as a dog. And there was like a little drawer underneath it's a spare bunk over here. We turned into a closet. And I was vomiting in that drawer. I couldn't even get up, And of course the guys would like, okay, kid, no more of that. And for days I remember laying there. And then I know Dad had pity on me, so I really thought he was showing a lot of compassion and love because I kept falling out of the bunk. And then we went out and got some kind of a plywood piece that was, you could smell it's full of oil or whatever. It was just disgusting. And he jammed that between the mattress and the side of the bunk, where they kind of nailed it in, so I didn't fall out. So now I just kind of rolling around, hitting the wall, and you roll and hit that thing. But whatever. I thought it was nice of him. I thought, wow, he really cares. Because you never saw him because he's always up in the wheelhouse. And then I remember, and I've said this story on one of the tapes we did, but honestly, when we got into Dutch, that was really a defining moment. It was just one of those moments where you just, when you see the mountains for the first time and you're coming in and all the boats and this is like 1978. You see all these just all the action going on and all the boats that were anchored up. You don't see it today. It was just really, it was like its own little city and just, moving around. And so we had a lot of fun there. Got in and fished blue crab St. Matthew's. And that was, then I got over my seasickness. We went out and so at the age of 12, I was on deck and I got to experience that. And, we were help sorting and stuff like that. But too small to throw shots and really do anything with the gear. Mostly just sorting, but just being a part of it. And I think that just shows a little bit of incentive. And so I think that went a long way. And and then I did St. Matthew's again at like 15, 16, 17, 18, whenever it was open after that. And that's why the teachers were not impressed because you're always, leaving school early if you went to Norway, or you're late for school because of blue crab season. Mm-hmm. And they had, like I know one year we, I was late, and we were coming down from St. Matt's, and that was always fun too because when I can remember being up in St. Matthew's Island, and we were on strike for like, I think a week or over a week, 10, 12 days, something like that. And a lot of my other friends that are in the fishing industry today were up there on different boats or family operated boats. And we're all around the same age. You're 14, 15, 16. And it was like a city outside that little island as well, waiting for the strike to get over because they wanted a better price. It was never established in Dutch. And, you have to deliver to a floating processor up there. You deliver it up there. Some guys would take a chance to bring the crab to Dutch, but half of them would die because of the water temperatures and the time in the tank. And so that was a lot of fun. And, even then we were, we had, one of your buddies had a skiff. And so you'd go from boat to boat and you'd visit all these different crews. And of course, when you're a teenager and other teenagers that are doing the same thing, even my other cousin, Jan, was up there that one year. We'd go beachcombing. We were fishing, we'd go in there and we were fishing trout. These are little lakes and streams that have hardly ever been touched by man. Mm-hmm. You could go up a stream and literally start kicking them out of the stream. And we didn't have hooks or anything. We took our strawberry cans. We had like empty strawberry can on the boat, and we found some kind of monofilament or twine. It was just like a real thin twine we had out of something. And then I remember Roy was on board here, Breckenridge. He made just out of little nails, tiny little, and he'd make little hooks and file them down. And then we take like some of the, little shavings from some of the crab line and make like a little, what do you call that? A fly. And then you'd wrap your line around a strawberry can a little way. And then we were just fishing them with that. And I mean, fish on. So that's what we did during the strike. So we did that and, filled up buckets full of trout and brought it back to the boat and gave it to other guys that didn't have a skiff, didn't get to the beach. Because not everybody had a skiff. It was interesting,
Great childhood.
Yeah, because you were real free, you could do whatever. And then if guys did want to ride from one boat, because we've got to think after a week, if anybody had any beer on the boat, it was pretty much gone. Because all the crews were sitting around. Well, what are they going to do? They're going to, if you could watch a movie, then you were doing that and having your beer. Like then, if you had a VHS player, that was a big deal. Before that it was Betamax. And I remember filming a bunch of Hogan's Heroes tapes when the boat was new to send up with my old man on beta. 25, 30 years later, the thing finally comes around to us, because you trade at sea. You trade with boats, or you put them on a buoy and you float your tapes to another guy. You trade during your seasons if you're going to have time to watch a movie. So that was a lot of fun. And that's right, that one year I was late for, I didn't go to Norway. I got to think about that. Wait a minute. Yeah, the year before I fished, and then I went to Norway and came back. And then the year after that I fished St. Matt's, I think. And that's when we did the strike and had and for me that was okay because it was just, seeing everything on the island and combing for ivory and all that good stuff. And that was this, I remember that was the same year when we were one of the first boats up there. We were laying for anchor. And we saw this antenna on the beach, up on a hill. And so we took the skiff in. Oh, I think, let me backtrack. Before we got to St. Matt's, I think we fished Nome red crab. I think that's what we did first. So I got to experience that, which is another red king crab season, but they're very small. So we went all the way up the Russian border, through Big and Little Diomede, went through there, went up to Nome, and there's another island up there, and we got to meet some of the natives on that island, traded there's just a couple of boats fishing up there, and we traded for like seal skins and things of that nature. You know, you gave them like diesel fuel, and because they were searching for ivory artifacts. That's what it was. I think we did Nome first, and then fished that Nome, and that's a real shallow fishery. And so you're only fishing like a shot, right? I think they're only like 20, 25 fathoms, something like that. They weren't real deep, and didn't get a lot of crab. And I remember going into we were anchored up for a storm, got to go into Nome, which was really neat. And there was the storm was going, but the old man was like, "Come on, let's go." So he just wanted to use a skiff. Got in there. Of course, they went in for some Thunderbird, and I'm just, pretty young guy, and I might be mixing up. This might have been when I was 14, 15, and the other one was 16. I can't remember, but go in there, and I remember going into one of the pubs there, and there was no. I think as long as you had an adult or something, you could go with them, but I remember Dick Parker was up there. He's like, "Keep your head down," I was like, forced my head down as we walked past the bar, and I found a little booth, and they got, they had their thing, had their deal, and then during that time there was a guy walking through, and they were digging up the streets of Nome, the main road. It's just mud, but they were digging it up for whatever reason, and they had sidewalks on either side. And some guy, right before we got there, reached down. He didn't know what it was. Grabbed like this rock, he thought, and it was a nugget the size of the palm of his hand. Right in the middle of town in Nome, size of the palm of his hand. It was just one of them stories you heard right after you got there. And I remember we left Leif Haugen. He was another guy from the same town, Norway, alone on the boat. He's on anchor by himself, and he's freaking out, because you're the anchor watch. Screw you, we're going to town. Yeah. And so that was a lot of fun. I think we stayed overnight there, because we couldn't get back out with a skiff, something like that. And then
you watched Thunderbird?
Yeah, Dad was a good guy. And then we fished. Can't remember where we offloaded. I know when we went island hopping up there, meeting some of the, they were, a lot of these, the natives that were there, the villagers, they had rights to dig. And, if they dug up a, like a little ivory artifact, I know they were telling us, like one little ivory artifact in the burial ground was going for like $20,000 back then. They were selling, I think, to a museum or something like that. So they were there on their, on their native burial ground, and they were looking for artifacts. So, they were real cautious about who was coming in and who was walking around. Of course, we befriended them, and they were spending all summers long there, just the man-made shacks. I wouldn't even call it that. But real nice people. And then. Yeah, and I think after that, that's when we went to St. Matthew. So we were there early, which makes sense. Yeah, we were there real early because we had just finished up with Nome. So then we're hanging around, and then we get back to this antenna story. So now all of a sudden, we're just lucky we have a skiff on board. And we see this antenna, and so we're like, okay, we're going to go beachcombing there anyway, waiting for the rest of the fleet to come in. And we go up on the top of this hill, and we see this little tent, and we're like, you got to be kidding me. This is St. Matt's. This is a deserted island. So I remember it was me and Fritjof and Menger, their name for it. Same town in Norway. Mm-hmm. And we go up, and it was funny. We're like, knock, knock. And this guy pops his head out of the tent. He looks like Grizzly Adams. I mean, he hadn't had a shave in forever. And he's like, he thought he was hallucinating. What the hell? Who are, You know, we're like, no, we're going to start our fishing season here. Who are you? You know, and his name was something Houston. I forget. But we at the time who was Matt Houston? It was on one of the television shows back then. God, Matt Houston. Anyway, look it up. Matt Houston. It was on an old TV show. So we called him Matt Houston because he was from Houston. I think his last name was Houston. Something like that. This guy had been up there for, I think, 2 to 3 months. And it was some kind of an oil survey, some kind of a survey for vessels going in the area, something like that. And this poor bastard, you know, his boat was on the other side of the island. They didn't have a skiff, so they couldn't come and get him. They were supposed to helicopter the guy in. That fell through. This giant antenna, it was the only, you know, thing that he had. But it was also, he had like $1 million worth of electronic equipment for this survey that he was doing. And so that was his baby. And we had the skiff, and he's like, oh my God. And this poor bastard, I mean, he was down to apples and water. And the helicopter could do a drop. They couldn't pick him up, but they could drop food or supplies or whatever. Maybe the chopper was breakdown at the time. And so it's like you're looking at your transportation, but you can't get to it. He'd be stuck there for weeks trying to get off the island.
And here's these 3 kids with a skiff.
Yeah, and we got the skiff. And next thing, you know, and he's down to apples and water, just starving to death. And he had to walk across the whole island to the other side to get his supplies where they dropped him off. But he was stationed on the other side, you know. I forget how many miles, but it's quite a hike. So he was just sitting there waiting. No food or anything like that, barely. I think he had supplies on the other side, but, you know, quite a hike. So we're like, well, we can get you a lift, you know. And this guy, we went looking for ivory artifacts and all that good stuff. But if he had been there for like 2-3 months, you know, he'd picked up I bet you his backpacks were so full of, you know, ivory chunks that make your head spin. Mm-hmm. And so we get him back to the boat. And obviously the first thing this guy wants to do is eat. And, you know, we made a meal for him. And I remember Fridge, you want some ice cream? He's like, yeah, you know those big half-gallon things. I'm not kidding. This guy hadn't had that in months, and he just dug into it. He ate the whole thing. Just bang, it was gone. And then it was like, here's dinner, you know. I mean, it was like, you know, you rescued the guy from Tom Hanks, you know, what was the movie?
Castaway.
Yeah, it was like Castaway. And
poor bastard.
Oh, I never seen a guy look like that or eat like that ever. And we got all of his equipment down, you know, the spendy stuff. And like I said, you know, he said, it's about $1 million right there, which is just amazing.
Yeah.
And so this has got to be 78, 79, 80, something like that. Or 80, 80, I can't remember. 80, 81. Let's say 80, somewhere in there. Yeah, probably 80. Yeah, probably 81, 80. Anyway, and of course we get him to his boat. And then we wait for the rest of the fleet. And then I think at that time we went on strike.
Hey guys, I know you want to hear more. We recorded for quite a while, so we're going to break this up into a couple episodes for you. But I encourage you to like, subscribe, and go back and listen to previous episodes if you'd like, other seafaring stories. And we'll have the second part of SIGs next week. Thanks. Bye.
Thanks for listening to Galley Stories. We hope you like what the net brought in. Please leave us a review on iTunes. Whether you like it or not, we're not fishing for compliments. Look us up on Facebook and Twitter too, and reach out to us at galleystories@gmail.com.